I lead off almost every video for rally coding by saying something like, oh, I get asked all the time about XYZ. And I know I say that on almost every single video, but I will say that this particular topic, the topic that we're going to cover in this video, definitely the most common question I get all the time. How do I do a deployment of a Webpack application? How do I deploy it? How do I let my friends, coworkers, boss, whoever, see the application that I'm working on? And how do I do that deployment in some kind of reasonably scalable fashion, right? Not just like push it off to GitHub pages, but how do I make something that can scale in the future if I actually want to? So in this video, we're going to outline steps on how we might tackle a Webpack deployment, excuse me, a Webpack deployment off to Heroku. So let's talk a little bit about it. I love my diagrams, so we're going to start off with a little bit of a diagram here. And we're going to come back to this diagram several times. So the entire point of this entire video that I really want to impress upon you, I really want you to just understand this one piece, and if you understand this one piece, you're going to be in like good shape for any deployment in the future for a Webpack-based application. And that one fact is to understand that when we are deploying our application or when we are writing our application, we have two separate pipelines. We've got this kind of development pipeline of how we write our code, test our code in the browser, and just kind of like, work and do our development. And then we have a completely separate process for doing our production deployment. Now, this isn't, there's a billion ways to do deployment at the end of the day, and so this is one possible interpretation right here. I'm not going to claim that this is like the end-all be-all approach right here, but I'm going to say that I've had great success with following this kind of two pipeline methodology of saying, here is some process I have for developing my code, and then here is some process I have for deploying my code to a production server. So we'll do one very quick run through these two diagrams here, or these two flows. And then we're going to go off, change a project that I've already installed, and we're going to try to install it, or deploy it off to Heroku and just kind of see how it goes, okay? So let's go through the development pipeline first. This is likely the pipeline or kind of the practices that you're very much used to. So we start off with kind of our code at the top, our repository. We run something like npm start or Webpack dev server, whatever that might be. When we run that command, all of our code gets processed by Webpack. Webpack is responsible for maintaining or linking together all of our different files, right? Like all those import statements, all those require statements, whatever you got, Webpack is all about linking those files together and producing some final builds like bundle.js or main.js or something like that. Webpack then hands off that built file to Webpack dev server, which is responsible for like giving you something to visit like localhost 8080 or 3000 or 8000 or whatever it is. Just something that we can visit in our browser to check out our application as we're developing it. And so this flow on the left-hand side is probably something that you're kind of reasonably familiar with, even if you don't really recognize it. If you've worked on any Webpack-based application, you're probably doing something like, off on the left-hand side over here. So we can juxtapose this process or this pipeline right here with how our production pipeline works or how we actually deploy our application. And so obviously, on the left-hand side, this is kind of like a running process, right? We've got our code here, and whenever we make a change, Webpack will rebuild some particular files and then serve them off to the dev server again. And so this is kind of on the left-hand side, it's a continuous rerunning process that happens over and over and over again as we're doing our development. Whereas on the right-hand side, our production pipeline is more like kind of a one-shot deal, right? We do our deployment one time, it builds, deploys, and we kind of walk away for a couple days or a couple hours until we decide to deploy it again. So just to be clear, left-hand side is kind of a continuous running process, whereas the deployment on the right-hand side is kind of like a one-shot deal. So let's do a run through on the production pipeline because this is the real point of this video that we're talking about. And after we do kind of a brief run through on this, we'll go through a little bit more details and we'll do an actual deployment of an application. So it all starts off with our code, right? Of course, we've got our code base, like some working application that we want to make available to other people online. And I'm saying here specifically that we want to work with Heroku. Okay, so if I'm going to DigitalOcean or AWS, these directions might change slightly, but everything I have is very well set up for working with Heroku, which is definitely one of the easiest hosting providers out there. And they also, at the end of the day, end up being pretty darn cheap as well. compared to some other competitors. DigitalOcean is just the cheapest you can find, but Heroku has a little bit more easier to work with. Anyways, getting a little bit off topic there. So let's go back up to the top. So we start off with our code. We're going to push our project to Heroku. And by push, I mean basically kind of copy paste our entire repository over to a Heroku server. And so from that point on, Heroku is like basically responsible for building our project and serving it out to the world. So we don't really get to do a lot of hands-on configuration after it goes to Heroku. We have to set up some configuration script to run so that once our code shows up on Heroku, it knows how to build and run our project. So that's the really key factor here. Heroku, we have to give it directions on how to build and serve our project. Now by default, Heroku will understand that we are pushing it a node package, and so it will install NPM modules for us, which is fantastic, definitely what we want. But besides installing some NPM modules, it doesn't really do a whole lot for us. So to make sure that Heroku actually builds and runs our application, and by the way, we'll talk exactly what I mean by builds, we're going to implement some additional scripts, notably one called post install and one called, I put server.js here, but it should really just be start. And only after these two scripts get ran or executed should I be able to visit an address like xyz@herokuapp.com and see my application actually running. Okay. So the idea here is that we're going to push our code off to Heroku. Heroku will install our NPM modules for us, which all of our dependencies like React, Redux, whatever else. And then we have to manually specify some amount of configuration to say, hey, Heroku, this is how you should build and run my project. So that's what we're going to spend a lot of time doing, setting up this post install thing and this start thing, whatever those are. Okay, so let's give this a shot. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm over at Heroku.com. I've already got an account here, and I'm going to create a brand new app. So we're going to do this from just like total scratch, right? Something you could follow through from total scratch. So you don't have to provide an app name. If you leave it blank, it'll generate one for us. That's totally fine. So I'm going to create my application. And there we go. Everything's deployed. And then if I scroll down a little bit, I get some directions on how I might create a Git repository inside my project. We'll walk through all this stuff in just a moment. So I'm going to go over to my application. So this is my project directory right here, just to show you what my project looks like once it should actually be deployed. I'm going to pull it open in the browser on a local server. So this would be using Webpack dev server in this case. And it's going to take just a second to get the thing started up. Always seems like it takes slightly too long. All right, almost there. There we go. All right, let's check this out. And okay, so here's my YouTube application that I've got. I can search for videos at the top. I can click on videos, whatever it is that I might want to do. But basically, what the app does is completely decoupled from deployment. So just this is what it looks like, and this is what we're going to try to get up to a Heroku server. All right, so I don't really need to have the app running at all, so I'll stop the process. I'm going to open up my code editor. So remember, the two tasks that we need to make sure that actually occur is I need to set up this kind of post install thing and this start thing over here. So let's figure out what these two scripts are. What are we actually doing? What do we have to do on the Heroku side? Okay, so these two scripts, or these two little pieces of configuration, are actually scripts that we're going to place inside of our package.json file. So these are going to be scripts that Heroku is going to run automatically for us. Heroku is set up to automatically call a script called post install and a script called start. Now the purpose of both of these scripts are absolutely key. Post install is a script that is intended to build our project in some fashion. I know I've been saying build all the time, so just to be clear, when I say build, I specifically mean take all of our development code, all these separate files, and run Webpack to produce a single JavaScript file that will be used for our application. So this is going to be like our bundle.js. This step right here is where we build or produce our bundle.js, our single production version of our application. And when I say single, I mean single JavaScript file. This script will be ran automatically after installing all of our NPM modules, and it's executed exactly once. So this post-install script right here is the ideal spot for us to tell Webpack, please go and build our application because we're about to deploy it and serve it to the rest of the world. After that script runs, Heroku is then going to execute a second script automatically called start. And remember, it's up to us entirely to make sure that these scripts are defined. So Heroku is going to try to run them. If they are not available, that's fine, but it's going to just kind of say like, oh, I don't know what you want me to do then, right? And it'll fail to actually deploy. So this start script right here is responsible for actually starting and maintaining the server. So this is where we actually say, okay, I've built my application. I've got like my index.html file. I've got my bundle.js. I want to serve this out to the world. And so this start script right here, we need to make sure that start actually makes like our server available to the world in response to HTTP requests. So as long as we implement these two scripts right here inside of our package.json file, that's basically all we got to do. That's the whole shebang right there. We just got to implement these scripts and Heroku will take it from there. So let's start off with our post-install script. We will create our post-install script. Our goal there is to make sure that it actually builds our application. That's what we want to do. So I'm going to open up my project back up, and I'm going to open up my package.json file. Inside my package.json file, I've got my script section, and I've already got a script called start in here. And so it just so happened that the boilerplate package that I'm using here already has a script called start. We will make a couple changes to this thing in just a minute, but for right now, again, we're going to be creating the post-install script. So I'm going to add another script. I need to first put a comma at the end of this line, and then I'll say post-install. And this is where it's kind of hard to naturally lead into what I'm doing here with this post-install script. The thing to actually build my package. Basically, this is just a bit of trivia. You just got to know how Webpack works. To tell Webpack that we want to build a production version of our entire application, we can run the command webpack-p, and that's it. If we run webpack-p, we will generate a complete bundle.js that contains all the code for our application. And I can actually prove that to you right now inside of my project directory. I can run webpack-p, and after a couple seconds, it's going to build my bundle.js file that has my entire application. Okay, so I'm going to save this file. And then I'm going to create my second script, which is going to be responsible for starting, running, maintaining my entire server. So people can visit it, get back some index.html file, and also get my bundle.js file, all that kind of good stuff. And so remember, that one's called start. I've already got a naming collision here. We've already got a script called start. This is just because of the boilerplate package I'm using already defined the script. So I'm just going to change this existing one to dev because it's really all about starting up my Webpack dev server for development. Okay, so in the case of my start script, again, this is what's going to be actually running some useful server for me. And so for my server that I want to run, I'm going to create a server file here in just a second called server.js. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to run the file server.js. Okay, so I'm going to save this. By the way, you can see, I know it's really small, but up here I've now got a bundle.js file inside of my project because that webpack-p file or command that I ran just finished actually kind of compiling all my stuff into a single bundle.js file right here. Just so you know it actually finished. Okay, so I need to now create my server.js file, which is going to be responsible for serving my application out to the world. So I'll create a new file called server.js. The code that we're going to place in here is going to be, what I'm trying to say here is the video that I did last week on Rally Coding, or 2 weeks ago, was all about creating a simple HTTP server and serving up a Webpack application. I'm going to kind of speed through the implementation here. If you want to figure out the kind of intricacies of what I'm doing, I recommend going back 2 weeks, checking out that video, and I go through a super in-depth explanation of everything I'm about to put in this file right here. Okay, so I'm going to just go through the implementation. First, we're going to create an Express application. Or excuse me, we'll import Express. I'm going to import the path module. I'll declare my port. And then I will create my actual Express application. Notice that on my port declaration right here, I've got this first line that says process.environment.port. And so Heroku, when it executes this server file right here, Heroku provides a support that it expects us to listen to traffic on. And we get that variable, from Heroku as an environment variable. And so if a variable is provided, if a port is provided, we need to make sure that we bind to that port and not just to arbitrarily 8080 or whatever we want to do. And that's why I've got this, okay, try to use port. If it's not available, just default back to 8080. Okay, now here really comes the part where I encourage you to go back to my video from 2 weeks ago and check out all the stuff in there on why I'm doing these different statements. But basically we're just saying if anyone tries to get any file out of here, give them bundle.js. Otherwise, if we don't know what route they're trying to get to, just send them back our index.html file. And then we'll app.listen on port and just console log server started. Okay, now before I actually try to deploy this to Heroku, I'm going to run it locally just to make sure I don't have any typos or anything in there. So I got server started after I ran node server.js. And I should now be able to go to localhost 8080. And yeah, looks good. Cool. Okay, so I've now implemented my post install script and my start script. So remember, post install is all about building our application. It gets executed one time on Heroku, and inside the script, I need to make sure I do everything required for generating a deployable version of my application, like my actual JavaScript file. And then I also just implemented a start script, which is responsible for saying, okay, here is my actual server, like my Express server that is responsible for sending people an index.html file, a bundle.js, or whatever other API endpoints I might have. So the last step we need to do is actually deploy it off to Heroku. So I already generated my Heroku server, and now we're going to kind of get into the realm of exactly how Heroku works. If this part right here is not that bad, we've got some very clear directions right here. I've already installed this Heroku command line tool and logged into it. And so all I have to do is start up a Git repository. I will add my Heroku endpoint or my Heroku server that I just generated as a Git hook or a remote origin. And then I can actually deploy the application. So I will first git init. I will add all the files I have in here. I can then add my Heroku endpoint. So Heroku, I'm adding an endpoint of this randomly generated name, Baroque Chocolatine. Okay, that's just a crazy town name, but okay, I'll buy it. And then the very last step I have to do is, I already committed all my code. All I have to do is push it all off to Heroku. And so this is one of the big promises of Heroku. One of the reasons that got so popular, in my opinion, years ago, was that it had this fantastic Git integration. And so if I want to push or deploy something to Heroku, all I have to do is treat it like a Git endpoint. So I can git push Heroku master. And so normally you might be used to writing git push origin master. And if you're using GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket, that would post it or shove all your code off to your remote repository. But in this case, by pushing to Heroku, we are actually pushing to our Heroku server, like our actual server. Okay, so we're going to run this, and let's see what happens. So we get some really nice output here. You'll notice that Heroku automatically detected that we're deploying a node application. It installs some, whatever stuff, cache, I don't know, stuff. And then here's the important part, installing node modules. So these are all the modules that we've got listed inside of our package.json file. By default, it's only going to install modules that are underneath the dev section. And so if you've got like some dev dependencies modules and just dependency modules, you'll just get your dependencies. Notice that we just saw, okay, wow, it's really up there. It was on the screen for just half a second, but here it is. This is our post-install script, webpack-p. And so this is what's responsible for building our bundle.js file. So after webpack-p executed, we ended up with this bundle.js, which is our complete application. And we can see these are all the installed NPM modules that we've got. And then finally at the very end, something, verifying, deploy, done. So let's check out our server now. Here it is right here. So this is where our application should be deployed. So baroquechocolatine.herokuapp.com. So let's give this a shot. And boom, there's our application, exactly as we saw it before. If you ever try going to your Heroku app URL up here and nothing pops up or just kind of hangs, one of the most valuable troubleshooting features of Heroku is the command line tool Heroku Logs. And this will reach out to your server and it will say, okay, are there any logs available from the server? Like, did anything go wrong? And so when I grab that, you can see that we've got like basically everything that happened on the server. Starting process with command npm start, which executed node server.js. That's the command we added. Here's server started. That's the console log we added inside of the server.js file. And then blah, 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 a bunch of stuff. And then eventually I made a request to our server, at the path, just /, and then we loaded up the style CSS. Here's the bundle.js and all the other stuff. And boom, there's our application. So that's pretty much it. That is Heroku deployment of a Webpack-based application in a nutshell. The big thing to keep in mind here, again, is to keep in mind that we've got a development pipeline and we've got a production pipeline. On the production pipeline, we are responsible for making sure that Heroku knows how to build our application and then actually run something. Run something to stuff files off to anyone who asks for something like bundle.js or index.html or whatever it is. And so normally this start command right here, what gets executed will be something like an express server. All we really had to do was make sure that we implemented the post install and the start commands so that whenever we deployed our application to Heroku, Heroku had some reasonable idea of what it had to do to get our server running. All right, so that is deployment in a nutshell. Again, there's just a billion ways to do deployments. This is one of the simplest ways out there, definitely the fastest to get started, to actually push your stuff out and be able to test it in the wild. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I do weekly videos on everything React, Redux, JavaScript, all topics. Check in again next week, and I don't know, we'll see what new topic we have at that point in time.